I am Julia, 24 years old. I work as a waitress at a small restaurant live with my mother in an ideological neighborhood that no one knows the name of. Every day starts with a pair of worn-out Gothic shoes and ends with 2 coins in my pocket. I used to think that as long as I live a good life and don't bother anyone, happiness will come sooner or later as a reward for those who don't give up. I was like that until the night I spent my last 2 coins to pay for the taxi, not for me. The man stood still in front of the bus, his shirt wrinkled, his hands empty. He said he was robbed. No wallet, no phone, no way to get home. The driver lazily said, "No money, no way." Everyone ignored him. I didn't. I didn't know why I did it, but I walked up and said, "I'll pay him." I didn't expect the person I helped was a millionaire. I clutched my tray as William paid for his coffee that morning. My heart hammered in my chest. I was betraying my own principles, notifying my manager just to give him that moment of relief. But I couldn't stop. Something inside me demanded I show him kindness. Latest truth I couldn't ignore. Even the smallest gesture can shatter a person's defenses. His gaze caught mine across the marble countertop. No pride, left only raw vulnerability in his dark eyes. "Thank you," he whispered so quietly that I almost missed it. But I felt it in every fiber of my skin like a seed planted in the cracks of my exhaustion. My hands trembled when I handed him the cup. I forced a smile, though my heart threatened to break. Caring felt dangerous. For years, I'd believed only strength could save me. Now I realized that compassion might save him and scar me. He visited daily. Each morning he'd slide into the same stool, same seat. He studied me as I brewed the tilt of my head, the curl of my smile, the rough edges of my voice when I talked about my dreams. He asked questions. No, he listened. Not like a man used to ordering board meetings, genuinely listened. I told him softly, almost under my breath, about my dream to open a bakery. "One day when the world is kinder," I said. I built that hope from fragments, a handful of coins, late-night study sessions at the kitchen table, stolen glances at baking tutorials on my phone. Every word felt like pulling out a thorn from my heart. Sometimes he stayed later, those rare quiet minutes after dinner rush. The world outside dimmed into shadows. I felt him lean in, eyes tracing my features with genuine interest, not pity. He shared glimpses of himself, stories about closed hotel doors, family obligations, expectations he never asked for but had to meet. "You make me question everything I thought I believed," he said once. My breath caught. Those words sounded like a blade carving wounds I didn't know I had. I dared to trust again. I dared to hope there was more than bread and bills in my life. At night, I replayed our moments, his quiet gratitude, the unexpected comfort of his address, the tremor in his voice when he caught me laughing at my silly joke. I asked myself, what story am I building with him completely unknown, or someone who sees me clearly? On the last day of the month, he left something small by my tray, a notebook filled with business ideas for my bakery, blueprints drawn by hotel designers, cost estimates penciled at the margins, simple motives scrawled in his handsome handwriting. "You deserve a chance." Tears burned in my throat. I folded the page like a prayer. That moment, I felt more alive than I remembered. Because overnight, 2 destinies intertwined, his marked by the weight of empire, and mine clutching the brittle hope of a dream. We were different, but something aligned: pain, courage, and unspoken hunger for something real. And though the world around us remained unchanged, we both felt like we were moving. So I wrote him a note the next day. "Thank you. I don't know where this leads, but I'm not afraid to find out." And before I dropped it at the counter, I paused. Then I tucked it into his coffee cup, knowing one truth: our story wasn't over yet. I never thought I'd see him again. Not because I forgot him, but because life had taught me that the people you help disappear and the ones worth remembering never return. That night on the bus was like every other long, heavy tired. My uniform was wrinkled, my hands sore, my mind already drifting toward my lumpy mattress, and a few hours of rest before it all began again. And then I saw him, a man crumpled at the back of the bus shirt, torn eyes hollow like he'd lost something no one could return. No one else looked twice. But I did. I didn't ask his name, didn't press for his story. I just dropped a few coins into his palm, barely enough for a full ride, and sat beside him, silent. He didn't speak. I didn't need him to. There was something in the way he held himself, in the quiet tension of his body that told me everything I needed to know. I'd seen that kind of stillness before in myself and others, in the moments between falling and breaking. I gave without expecting anything back, not even a thank you. I'd learned that kindness, real kindness, isn't about transaction. It's about recognition. The next morning, life moved on. Coffee, burnt toast, customers who snapped their fingers and didn't meet my eyes. I returned to the rhythm of survival. But when the night came, his face returned too. The way he sat, the way he looked at me, not with gratitude or pity, but with clarity, like he'd finally been seen, and it terrified him. So when he walked through the door of the diner 2 days later, I thought I was imagining it. He looked better, cleaner, composed, but his eyes were the same. And those eyes found me. I was laughing with the cook, wiping down the counter, pretending the world didn't feel like a weight on my back. He stood there framed by the doorway like some fever dream that decided to stay. I didn't say hello. I said, "You again." He smiled small, cautious, like he was stepping into unfamiliar territory. "Yeah, me again." He didn't hand me money, didn't flash a business card or offer some grand gesture. Instead, he said, "The one thing that mattered, I couldn't stop thinking about you." It threw me. Not because it was intense, but because it was honest. I raised an eyebrow, teasing. "That's flattering." "A bit much, but flattering. I'm not usually like this," he admitted. "That's hard to believe," I said, but I was already smiling, already softening. Then he asked, "What's your name?" And for a second, I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because it felt like the first time in a long time that someone wanted to know it and hold it not for paperwork or an order, but to remember it. "Julia," I told him. He repeated it like a secret, like it meant something, like I meant something. In that moment, I wasn't just a girl in a green uniform on a night bus. I wasn't a tired waitress in a rundown diner. I was someone unforgettable. And he, this man who could have walked away, who was probably supposed to stood there as if meeting me again, was the most important thing that had happened to him in a long, long time. It wasn't a fairy tale, not even close, but maybe it was the beginning of something else entirely, something quieter, something real. I was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang a sound so familiar it barely registered at first. I didn't bother looking up. It was probably someone on their way to work needing caffeine, or maybe a lost tourist asking for directions. Just another face, another voice, another routine. But then something in the air changed. A hush, subtle but electric, settled over the diner like the breath the world holds right before a storm breaks. I felt it before I saw him. When I finally glanced toward the door, my hand froze mid-wipe. Standing there framed by the afternoon sun and the cracked glass door was the man from the bus, but not the broken figure I remembered. His clothes were sharp now, tailored, pressed, expensive. His posture was straighter, his jaw freshly shaven, his whole body humming with the polish of money and power. But his eyes, they hadn't changed, still dark, still heavy, still carrying something unspoken and deeply human, a weight I had once recognized in a single fleeting glance. My heart skipped a beat, caught somewhere between disbelief and something warmer. I almost dropped the rag in my hand, but caught it at the last second, masking my sudden nerves with a casual toss of the towel over my shoulder. He looked at me, not like I was a waitress in a green uniform, not like I was background noise in his day, but like I was the reason he'd walked through the door. I took a breath and stepped toward him, trying to summon whatever calm I had left. "You again," I said, letting a half-smile curl at the edge of my lips. His smile was real. Not the kind I'd grown used to, the hollow ones from customers who never tipped, or the slimy ones from men who thought a uniform meant availability. This was different. It was soft, almost careful, as if he knew too much had already been said in silence. "I had to find you," he said simply. I arched a brow, folding my arms. "Why? You helped me when I had nothing." I let out a laugh, dry and dismissive. "It was just a bus fare." "No," he said, voice lower, steadier. "It wasn't." And the way he said it, the absolute certainty in those 3 words, made me pause. Because suddenly I believed him. Not just because of the way he spoke, but because of the way he stood there. There was no agenda in his posture, no calculation in his eyes. Just a man who looked like he'd come back to a place that haunted him. A man who remembered. The memory of that night surged back with a quiet ache. The way he'd looked so lost, so detached from the world. The way he hadn't asked for help, but needed it more than anyone I'd seen that week. That moment on the bus had stayed with me, tucked in the corners of my mind, where I kept things I didn't want to feel too deeply. I poured him a cup of coffee without asking, my hands suddenly more aware of themselves than usual. As I handed it to him, our fingers brushed brief, warm, and electric. Neither of us moved away. We just stood there, caught in the moment, suspended between 2 lives that had somehow intersected again. He took a seat at the counter, still watching me. Not the way some men watched me, not like they were waiting for a performance. He watched like he was trying to memorize something, trying to understand the rhythm of my world. He didn't interrupt, didn't fill the air with small talk, just sat there quietly absorbing. And I let him. Not because I owed him anything, not because I was curious, but because a part of me, quiet, foolish, deeply human, wanted to see what happened next. Maybe I was reckless. Maybe I was naive. But for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at me like I mattered, and I wanted to see where that look could lead. I was refilling the sugar jars when the bell above the door rang again. Same sound as always, the familiar clink of metal and the tired creak of hinges, but something about it felt different this time. I turned, expecting the usual, a delivery guy, a regular someone looking for a caffeine fix. Instead, there he was, the man from the bus. His clothes were different, now cleaner, tailored, more intentional, but his eyes, those eyes, still carried something heavy, something real. I froze, my hand suspended in midair over the sugar bin, suddenly unsure of everything. He walked toward the counter slowly, not confidently, but cautiously, like someone trying to return to a place he wasn't sure he belonged. I straightened my apron and forced a smile, nerves fluttering in my chest. "Hey, you." He gave a small nod, almost sheepish. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd recognize me." I let out a soft laugh, trying to shake off the tension. Kind of hard to forget someone who owes me bus fare. That made him smile, for real, genuine, and a little surprised. It softened something about his face, something guarded. "That's actually why I'm here," he said, eyes never quite leaving mine. "To pay you back." I raised a brow. "You tracked down a diner just to pay me $2? He shrugged, looking almost boyish. "Well, technically, I also owe you a thank you. And a coffee." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, sliding it across the counter between us. But I didn't move to take it, because in that moment, it wasn't about the money. The way he looked at me, it wasn't just gratitude. There was something else there. Something quieter. Like maybe I'd given him more than just a ride home, and maybe he wasn't quite sure how to name it yet. "You don't owe me anything," I said, my voice softer now. It was just the right thing to do. He paused, considering that. "Most people don't do the right thing," he murmured. I shrugged, glancing at the coffee pot. Maybe they're tired. He didn't respond to that, just nodded like he understood more than he let on. I poured him a cup of coffee, no questions, no hesitation. Black the way he'd ordered it on the bus. He took the cup, wrapped his fingers around it like it was the first real warmth he'd felt in days. "I never got your name," he said. "Julia," I replied. He repeated it like he was trying it on his tongue. Julia. I should have asked for his name, too. I should have. But somehow in that moment, it didn't matter. Because all that mattered was that he came back and I wasn't ready to let him go. He came back the next morning. And the one after that. Always just before the rush, slipping in through the glass door, as if carried by routine, settling into the same corner booth, like it had always belonged to him. But there was nothing possessive about the way he sat there, no entitlement, no expectation, just a quiet presence that fit into the morning light, like it had been missing all along. At first, our conversations danced around the surface of things. The weather, the toast that always came out burnt from table 4, the jukebox that only ever played one Sinatra song no matter which button you pressed. But the way he listened, the stillness in his eyes, the way his head tilted just slightly when I spoke, it made it impossible not to go deeper. The words spilled out before I could stop them, like water breaking through a dam too long ignored. I told him about my mother, how she still worked evenings at the laundromat even though her knees gave her hell. I told him about how I started waitressing at 17 because we needed rent, and somehow I just never found the exit. And then, almost without meaning to, I told him about the dream I kept tucked behind my ribs, a tiny bakery, lemon tarts that made your mouth water, bread so fresh it made the whole street smell like home. A place where I wouldn't have to answer to anyone but the dough rising in the morning sun. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask questions meant to sound interested but felt hollow. He just nodded like every detail meant something, like he understood the weight of each word. Like my dream wasn't a fantasy but a possibility. Sometimes he'd talk too. Not often, but when he did, it felt like pulling sunlight through cracks in a heavy wall. He told me about books, old ones, strange ones, ones that made him feel less alone. He spoke of the silence in crowded rooms, of how loneliness didn't always look like isolation. And once, after taking a sip of the coffee I'd made without asking, he said, "It never used to taste like anything, but now it does." I turned away to hide the heat crawling up my neck. I didn't mean to care about his visits, but I started watching the clock, waiting for that quiet moment at 9:07 when the door would swing open and he'd step into my little world. When it didn't happen one morning, something hollowed out inside me. The ache was small, but sharp, tucked behind my ribs like a missed heartbeat. He showed up eventually, tie askew and eyes bruised by sleep. "Bad morning," he muttered as he slid into his seat. I didn't ask questions. I just placed a muffin in front of him and refilled his cup. He smiled, tired but grateful, and that was enough. We didn't need declarations. We didn't need to name what was forming between us. It was in the silences, in the shared glances, in the way he never had to remind me how he took his coffee. Sometimes all you need is someone who remembers, Someone who shows up not to rescue you, not to rewrite your life, but to sit beside you in the middle of it and say, without words, I see you. I stayed busy with the other customers, kept the napkin holders filled, wiped down the booths like I always did, but my body moved on habit while my heart quietly waited for his laugh, his questions, the warmth he never announced but always brought. We were building something neither of us dared define. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was real in the way small things become everything when no one else is paying attention. It was in the worn leather of the booth, the smell of burnt toast, the steady hum of the jukebox playing that same old Sinatra tune. It was in the way he looked at me, not like I was a waitress serving his coffee, but like I was the only reason it finally tasted right. I should have known. The way he spoke, the way he moved. Calm, deliberate, like someone used to being watched and never quite able to let their guard down. There was a polish to him, a practiced ease, like the kind you find in people who've spent their lives rehearsing for a spotlight they claim not to want. But I ignored it. I told myself he was just quiet, just thoughtful. A man with kind eyes and too many unspoken thoughts. Someone broken in the same place as I was. And I wanted to believe that. Until that night. The dinner rush was chaos, clattering plates, shouted orders, the smell of onions, and old grease thick in the air. I was carrying a tray of burgers and coffee refills when the TV above the counter flickered to a late business segment. Just background noise, until I heard his voice. I looked up, and there he was, William Stone, in a tailored suit standing in front of a line of reporters speaking about hotel expansions in Paris and Madrid with the cool detachment of someone who's never had to count change for a gallon of milk. The caption read, William Stone, CEO of Stone International. My breath caught. The tray shook in my hands. The plates rattled and one nearly slipped. I set them down faster than I should have, ignoring the curious glance from table 6. My heart pounded. William, the man who sat at my counter every morning, the man who said he was between things, the man who never talked about his past but always wanted to hear mine. A lie, or maybe not a full lie, but not the truth. He never mentioned money, never said his last name, never even hinted at the fact that people bowed when he entered a room. Instead, he sat quietly, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, listening like he had nothing else to hold on to. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I moved through it like a ghost, delivering orders, refilling cups, laughing at jokes I didn't hear. But inside me, something was splintering. It wasn't about the money. I didn't care about the hotels or the tailored suits. I cared that while I shared the rawest parts of my life, my fears, my family, my dreams, he was choosing silence, hiding behind it. The next morning I woke early, heart knotted and heavy. I told myself he wouldn't show up, that he'd seen the news too and would know the illusion was broken. But at exactly 9:07, the bell above the door rang. He walked in like always. Same quiet steps, same half smile. Like nothing had changed. He slid into the booth, nodded at me gently, and God help me, I still reached for the coffee pot. Muscle memory, grief, habit. I poured it without a word, placed the cup in front of him, then turned away. He noticed. Of course he did. Julia, he said quietly, careful with my name. Is something wrong? I faced him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw how carefully constructed his kindness had been, how easily he had slipped into my life asking questions, holding space, while never giving the same in return. You lied, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He winced. I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. Same thing, I said, and it was. Because trust isn't always about what you say. It's about what you choose to keep hidden. He didn't lie with words. He lied with omissions, with all the things he let me believe while he sipped his coffee and listened to my life unravel. And now I couldn't unsee it. Not the money, not the empire, but the silence and the truth he chose not to tell. I didn't plan to go. I told myself I wouldn't, that it wasn't worth it, that silence was enough. But something deeper, hotter kept clawing at my chest. Not just pain, not even sadness. Betrayal. A slow, suffocating kind of rage that demanded air. So I put on the cleanest clothes I had, pulled my hair back tight, and walked straight into his world. The hotel was a palace, all marble floors and gilded edges with chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen rain. The kind of place you only enter on screen or in dreams you don't let yourself have. I didn't fit. The woman at the front desk looked at me like I'd taken a wrong turn from a service elevator. A bellhop in polished shoes glanced up, and then down again, unsure whether to stop me. But I didn't give them the chance. My steps echoed louder than they should have on that marble. Sharp, certain. I kept moving. When I reached his floor, the carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of my footsteps. His assistant blinked, startled. I didn't wait for her permission. I didn't need it. I pushed the heavy glass door open, and there he was, behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a museum, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my month's rent. Calm, composed, completely collected for a man who had lied to my face for weeks. His eyes widened the second he saw me. Julia. You could have told me I snapped before he could lace my name with whatever softness he thought would fix this. He stood palms slightly out like he wanted to reach for something that didn't exist. I wanted to. I was going to. But you didn't. I cut him off. The words cracked on their way out, anger wrapped around disappointment. You sat across from me every day. Let me talk about rent, about counting coins, about scraping by to chase a dream I've never even seen come true. While you flew in private jets between coffee breaks. He flinched, his jaw clenched. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, William? I hurled his real name like a weapon, and it landed the way I wanted it to. In silence. A silence thick with guilt and truth and everything he should have said long ago. He finally exhaled, voice lower now, softer. It was the first time in years someone saw me, really saw me, without expectation, without fear, without a price tag. I didn't want to lose that. My hands curled at my sides. I didn't want to cry, but my throat burned. He added, I just wanted to be real, for once. Outside the title, the legacy, the money, just a man. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. I wanted to pretend this whole thing was built on something honest, even if it started in shadows. But I couldn't ignore the hollowness inside me now. The betrayal, the weight of what he never gave me. The way every moment between us now felt borrowed like a memory that had been rewritten. I took a step back, breath shallow. Maybe you should have started by being honest. Julia, please. But I was already turning, not running, not breaking, just leaving, walking out of a hallway that shimmered like gold, but felt like ice. My head stayed high, my heart in pieces. Because if he could lie about who he was, then maybe everything else had been a lie too. His office was warm, polished, perfect, everything I wasn't. I stood there surrounded by gold trim and quiet air conditioning, feeling like a stain on white silk. I was still wearing my waitress uniform, the hem slightly stained with coffee, the scent of kitchen grease clinging to my skin like an identity I couldn't wash off. The carpet under my feet was too soft, too quiet, like it might swallow me whole for daring to step into this world that wasn't mine. He looked untouched by all of it, not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in sight, as if nothing could penetrate the carefully controlled orbit he lived in. but inside me, something was unraveling, raw and furious and aching. What hurt the most wasn't the money. It wasn't the empire or the headlines or the legacy I'd seen broadcast on that glowing screen above the counter. It was the trust, the delicate, invisible bridge I had built with every word, every smile, every truth I handed him like a gift. He had listened to my fears with those steady eyes. He had watched me talk about rent, about my mom's second job, about the bakery I'd dreamed of since I was 12. He'd taken it all in like it mattered. But I never got to ask about his world because he never offered it. He let me believe he was one of us, just drifting, just figuring things out. He took the truth from me like it was free, and he gave nothing back. So when he said he wanted to be real, something inside me broke. Because I was always real. I didn't have the luxury of pretending. I couldn't take off my life like a suit at the end of the day. I couldn't rent humility for the thrill of it or taste poverty like a weekend escape. I lived it. I carried it. It shaped me, scarred me, built my every decision. And he had the privilege of treating my world like a detour. So when I walked away from that office, it wasn't pride. It was protection. It was survival. Because I knew myself well enough to understand that if I stayed, if I let myself believe that someone like him could truly see me, choose me, stay with me, I would fall for him completely. And I wasn't sure I'd survive being broken by someone who had the power to walk away with everything I was. He had shown me kindness. Yes. Gentle mornings, soft questions, a listening ear. But love isn't soft when it comes with silence. Love isn't real if it's only real for one of us. I didn't want his apologies. I didn't want his wealth. I wanted honesty. I wanted to matter outside of a storyline he crafted, to feel grounded again. And until he could give me that, not charm, not gestures, not regrets, I had to leave, even if a part of me already missed him. Even if every time I closed my eyes, I still saw his face across the diner counter. But I had learned something. Finally, heartbreak wasn't the end. Sometimes it was the beginning of demanding more. We didn't speak after that. Not a word, not a message. Not even a stolen glance across crowded sidewalks or the sting of a whispered rumor echoing through the alleys of the city. It was as if a line had been drawn clean, final, unspoken. But silence, I learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live with an echo. I went back to my routines, pouring coffee, wiping down counters that never stayed clean, smiling at customers who never remembered my name. I went through the motions of life like a dancer with no music, each step carefully memorized, perfectly timed, but hollow. I told myself it didn't matter, that the ache would pass, that people leave, and you learn to stand alone again, and again, and again. But everything felt a little duller. The coffee lost its bite. The city lost its rhythm. Even the jukebox, always stuck on that one Sinatra song, started sounding like heartbreak instead of background noise. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just felt less. Like something soft and sacred had been stolen from me without warning. And I hated myself for missing him. Not the air, not the empire, not the marble floors, or the tailored suits, or the headlines that made his name feel like a brand. I missed the man who sat in my booth like it was the only place he could breathe. The man who asked about my mother, who remembered how I took my coffee, who looked at me like I wasn't just surviving but existing. Fully, brightly, fiercely. I missed the man who listened without fixing, who stayed without asking, who said my name like it meant something holy. But how do you trust someone who wears a mask so perfectly? How do you believe in laughter and softness and small kindnesses when you're not even sure they were real? I kept trying to replay our moments, testing them for cracks. Was the smile honest? Was the silence heavy because it was full or because it was hiding something? I didn't have answers. Only shadows. Sometimes at night, when the diner closed and the chairs were flipped and the smell of grease clung to my skin, I'd find myself staring at the door. Just for a second. Just long enough to hope I'd see him walk in, hair a mess, eyes tired, a whisper of apology in his hands. He never did. The door stayed closed, the stool stayed empty, and yet I knew he was out there, somewhere in this city that never sleeps, breathing the same air, maybe sitting in boardrooms making decisions that moved money and power like chess pieces, maybe smiling for cameras, shaking hands, saying the right things, carrying a name that meant weight and legacy and chains, a name I couldn't say without tasting salt and iron. But beneath all of that, beneath the billionaire and the brand, I knew there was a man who'd once stood in front of me unguarded just for a moment, Orige. And I knew this: if he missed me, truly missed me, he would come back. Not with flowers or grand gestures, but with truth, with humility, with the kind of love that doesn't wear masks or hide behind titles, the kind of love that chooses you even when it's inconvenient, especially then. So I waited. Not with naive hope, not with romance dripping from my fingertips. I waited with quiet strength, with the kind of patience born from pain, with a heart that hadn't stopped listening, not for fairy tales, but for footsteps. Footsteps that might return, or might not, because some stories don't need a prince. They just need someone willing to come back real. There were nights I hated myself for missing him. I'd lie in bed after long shifts, muscles aching, uniform tossed on the chair, and I'd stare at the ceiling trying to erase the shape of his smile from memory. I told myself he lied, that he played a role, and I was just another naive girl who believed too quickly, gave too easily. I listed every reason I could think of to forget him. I repeated them like a prayer, like a spell, hoping they would cast out whatever ghost of him still lingered in the corners of my thoughts. But none of it worked, because you can't unfeel what was real. And deep down, under all the anger and confusion, I knew what I felt was real. The weight of it pressed against my ribs in the quiet moments. That hush after closing when the jukebox stopped playing and the only sound was the hum of the fridge and the echo of his voice still floating in the air like it had nowhere else to go. Some mornings I'd catch my reflection in the cafe window. My eyes looked older than they used to, tired, bruised by too many sleepless nights and too many thoughts I couldn't silence. My hair was always tied back in a rush, my apron permanently stained with grease and someone else's lunch, and I'd wonder, did he ever think of me? Did he ever stop to remember how I took my coffee? 2 sugars, no cream, or how I used to hum old jazz tunes when I thought no one was listening. The worst part wasn't the silence, it was the imagining, wondering where he was, what he was doing. Was he back in boardrooms wearing suits tailored to perfection, commanding attention with the same voice he once used to tell me I made him feel like he wasn't performing? Was he sipping champagne and 5-star suites while I counted quarters to buy a bag of flour for my mom's pie recipe? Sometimes I'd convince myself it was all an illusion, that those mornings, those quiet conversations, the look in his eyes, none of it was real. Maybe I invented it. Maybe I needed something to believe in so badly that I turned a stranger on a bus into a fairy tale. But then I'd remember the way he looked at me that first day, how he held that coffee cup like it tethered him to the world, how his silence never felt empty, it felt safe. I wanted to hate him. I needed to. It would have been easier if I could just switch that part of me off, label him as a mistake, and move on. But all I could feel was the echo he left behind. Faint, steady, persistent, like the last note of a song you didn't realize meant something until it was over. He once said he wanted something real. So did I. And maybe that's why we both ran. Because the real things, the honest, messy, unfiltered ones, they don't let you hide. They demand everything. And they scare people like us the most. People who've learned to survive by being invisible. people who protect their hearts by locking them behind sarcasm and routine. We didn't know how to stand still in love. We only knew how to flee from it. But even in running, I kept looking back. Because no matter how far you go, the real things, they follow you. When I told her I left everything behind, she didn't smile. There was no warm embrace, no tears, no soft confessions of having waited for this moment. She just stood there, eyes fixed on me, unflinching, like she was peeling back my words to see what lived underneath them. I could feel the weight of her silence pressing against my ribs, a pressure more honest than any accusation. "I don't want to be someone's escape fantasy," she said finally. Her voice was even, but something fierce lived inside it. "Not even yours." Her honesty hit harder than any corporate takedown I'd ever faced. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And that's what made it sting. I know I said the word steady but soft. That's why I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking to build something with you, something that's not inherited or sold or worn like a suit. She folded her arms, guarded but not closed. "You think just because you walked away from your world, you get to walk into mine, no?" I replied, holding her gaze. "I'm asking for permission." That stopped her. She blinked like she hadn't expected that answer. Like the idea of being asked instead of taken aback or overlooked was foreign. And maybe it was. She wasn't the kind of woman people asked permission from. She was the kind they expected to endure. She'd been working 12-hour shifts since 17, living on tips and survival instincts. She had been seen but never truly regarded. I watched her study me, the silence stretching between us like a bridge that might crack or hold. Her eyes, dark with questions, flicked over me, not judging, just searching. Then her voice, quiet but direct. "A bakery by the ocean, a boutique hotel." I said, careful not to sound rehearsed. "Nothing big. Just 10 rooms. You run the bakery. I'll handle the logistics. But your name goes on the sign." Her lips curved barely. "You know bakeries don't make people rich, right?" "I'm not doing it to be rich," I said without hesitation. "I've been rich. I'm doing it to feel alive." She took a long sip of coffee. The cup looked too big in her hands, or maybe her thoughts were just far away. The clock on the cafe wall ticked steadily above us, but it felt like we were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere between maybe and not yet. Then she set the cup down and said, like a breath caught between stubbornness and truth, "I'll do it, but not because of you." And I smiled, slow and real. I wouldn't want it any other way. We didn't start with blueprints. We started with dirt. With scraped knees, sunburnt arms, and arguments over things neither of us fully understood. The kind of arguments that don't come from anger, but from exhaustion from two people trying to learn a language they were never taught how to build something together. It turns out building a dream is messy, especially when it's real. The land itself was a paradox. Quiet but wild just a few hundred steps from the ocean, cracked concrete from whatever stood there before with stubborn wildflowers growing defiantly between the breaks. It was beautiful, but also broken like us. Turning it into something livable, let alone a boutique hotel and bakery, would take more than good intentions. And a Pinterest board. It took sacrifice. It took long nights and early mornings, bruised hands and bruised egos. It took us. We ran into our first budget issue only 3 weeks in. The imported kitchen tiles I had fallen in love with were nearly double the price we'd planned. The ovens William wanted, industrial grade, sleek, impossibly efficient, were not only back-ordered, but laughably overpriced. We stood in the middle of the unfinished kitchen blueprint, scattered and tempers short. "We could go cheaper?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, pretending it didn't sting to let go of pieces of the dream I had held on to for so long. But he didn't waver. He shook his head slow and certain. If we start cutting corners now, we'll end up with something that doesn't feel like either of us. And he was right. That's what scared me. Because growing up poor teaches you to compromise first and dream later. I had spent so long adapting, surviving, finding the next best thing instead of the thing I actually wanted. But William, he was learning patience. He was learning how to wait. And I reluctantly, painfully was learning how to trust. So we paused, took a breath, delayed the opening by 2 months. And we didn't treat it like failure. We treated it like choosing, like deciding that the foundation of this place of our life had to be built on something stronger than speed. Some nights after the crew had left and the tools had gone silent, we'd sit on the construction site floor with our backs against unfinished walls. The stars above us blinked into view while we ate cheap takeout and dreamed out loud. He'd point toward an empty space and say, "One day someone's going to check into that room with the blue shutters and fall in love." And I'd smile sometimes, too tired to reply, but always feeling something deep and warm spread through me. Peace, yes, but also this stubborn, aching joy. A kind of joy I'd never let myself believe in before him. We weren't just building a business. We were laying the groundwork for something larger, messier, and infinitely more precious. We were building a life. There were days we didn't speak, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after weeks of chasing a dream barefoot when the ground won't stop cutting you open in small, invisible ways. Every muscle ached, not just from labor, but from holding in doubts too heavy to name aloud. I had never built anything before. Not like this. My life had always been about patching holes, not laying foundations. About surviving, not sculpting a future. I came from a world of cracked ceilings and borrowed dreams where stability meant making do with what you had, even if it was never enough. But William was different. He understood blueprints and budgets, timelines and tiles. He wanted order. He wanted polish. He tried to build this life like a business plan, neat, strategic, efficient. But dreams don't come with spreadsheets. They're messy. They grow crooked and hearts. They don't follow straight lines. One evening, I lost my patience. We were crouched in what would become the bakery kitchen, surrounded by boxes and invoices and a leaking sink. I snapped, heat rising in my voice. We don't need marble sinks, Will. We need plumbing that works and chairs that don't wobble. He didn't flinch, didn't shout, just looked at me, worn down but steady. I want people to walk in and feel like they're somewhere special. I threw the invoices onto the table with a harsh slap. You think I've ever had the luxury to care about special? I just want to open before I turn 50. There was a beat of silence, sharp, uncomfortable. Then he spoke again, his tone softer, almost reluctant. "I'm not asking for perfect. I just don't want to do this halfway." That's when it hit me. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing meaning. And so was I. We were just doing it in different dialects. For him, meaning lived in design, in beauty, in creating something that felt intentional. For me, it lived in survival and getting things done. We weren't wrong. We just hadn't learned how to translate each other yet. That night, instead of fighting, we stayed behind after everyone left and repainted a broken windowsill together. No music, no words. Just the rhythmic sweep of our brushes and the quiet understanding that something fragile had shifted. In that silence, we didn't find a solution. But we found something better: respect. We still didn't have enough money to do it all the way we dreamed. But we had time. We had sweat. We had stubbornness, scraped knuckles, and matching bruises from hauling secondhand tiles down 3 flights of stairs. And we had each other not perfectly, but fully. We sold furniture, bargained at flea markets, watched DIY tutorials like gospel. Every delivery was a negotiation, every light bulb a victory, because this wasn't just about walls and wiring. This was a promise we were stitching together room by room. A promise that we could build something out of nothing. That two people from different worlds could meet in the middle and create a space that felt like truth. And every time I saw William wiping dust off a shelf, misreading a tool manual, or learning how to seal grout with absolute concentration, I believed in that promise a little more. Because he wasn't trying to impress me. He was trying to understand me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was building someone else's dream. I was building ours. The call came just after sunset when the sky turned bruised purple and the ocean's hush pressed against the porch. William and I were in the middle of a debate over curtain fabrics, linen sapphire, the kind that catches the light just so when my phone vibrated. I almost didn't answer it. But something in me paused and I picked up. "Julia," he said, his voice smooth, familiar, dangerous. "Eric." I swallowed a sigh that lodged in my throat. My heart backed away, instincts flaring red and ragged. "Yeah, it's me." The sound of his name on his lips scraped old wounds I'd believed were sealed shut. But healing isn't the same as forgetting. "I heard about your place," he said. "Thought I'd stop by. Check in." A lie I didn't ask for. A threat I somehow couldn't ignore. "No need," I said, sharper than I meant. The words clicked cold in the silence. "We're doing fine." He paused, then laughed soft and too familiar, dipped in something that once rang like intimacy. "Come on, Jules. Don't be like that." I hung up. The phone clattered in my hand. My fingers shook so violently, I pressed it against my chest like a shield. William heard, always hearing. He set the fabric sample down and studied me, his eyes an anchor in the fading light. "Who was that?" I tried to sound normal. "Someone I thought I'd erased. Old mistake." He didn't press. He just asked quietly, "Do I need to worry?" I closed my eyes. No, but I might. We didn't speak after that. Not until the sky lost every color and the porch lights flickered like fragile hope. We sat in silence, listening to the waves swallow the day, both of us attuned to the imaginary footsteps his words had unleashed. Eric had never been violent, but he'd been good at something just as lethal: manipulation. A whirlwind of charm followed by cruelty wrapped in affection. He took my agency one word at a time and called it love. I'd known it only too well. I hadn't told William all of that. Not yet. I hadn't wanted to appear fragile or worse, blamable. And part of me still wondered why I'd let him in so far. Now with Eric's voice alive again on my voicemail, my old defenses stirred. Shadows I thought buried reared their heads. William didn't ask questions. He didn't assume things. He reached for my hand again. His thumb brushed my skin. Quiet. Reassuring. His concern rippled through me, warm and deep for both of us, for this fragile place we were trying to build. Because sometimes the past doesn't knock to be let in. It knocks to test if your locks are strong enough to hold. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the distant crash of waves and imagining Eric showing up at the gate, smiling like he owned this place because he'd once owned pieces of me. I imagined confrontation. I imagined tears. I imagined losing everything I'd rebuilt. Morning came without rain, but with a suffocating weight in the air. I found William in the unfinished lobby, carefully positioning a reclaimed bench. His head turned slowly when he saw me. I called a security consultant. He said softly, so I wouldn't jolt, "Just to make sure your space, our space, stays yours." I nodded, choking on gratitude and guilt. "Thank you," I whispered. He stepped forward without touching me. "Whatever you need, whenever you're ready." I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden every secret. But the words stalled on my tongue, fragile as a threatened blueprint. Instead, I took a deep breath. "Let's go back to work," I said. "We've got a bakery to build." He gave me a small, proud smile. "Yeah, we do." Some days later, I walked through the construction site alone. The sun warmed the half-built frames. Someone had drilled down new studs while we slept. Wildflowers caught the light, defiantly blooming through the rubble. I realized then this project, this dream, wasn't just about rooms and ovens and breakfast counters. It was about foundation, about roots and locks and safety. And I wasn't willing to walk away again. I looked at the sketches taped to a beam, the windows with blue shutters, the counter where guests would order croissants, the lamplit patio where couples would whisper by candlelight. It was beautiful, but it was vulnerable too. A voice spoke behind me. "Williams, ready for curtain shopping?" I nodded. "Let's go." But this time I answered my phone. "Not now, Eric." And I hung up, click, shutting the door on my past without turning back. Not with fear, with intention. And with William beside me, matching my step, building something no one could take away. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between invoices and appliance manuals, heavy in my hands before I even opened it. It was thick pressed with gold-embossed edges that caught the afternoon light like a warning. Everything about it screamed importance, too formal to be friendly, too familiar to be dismissed. When I handed it to William, I already knew it wasn't good. He took it without a word, sat down by the window where the sun filtered through unfinished blinds, and peeled open the envelope with a kind of quiet dread. I watched his eyes move across the page, his face a mask of calm, but something inside him shifted. His shoulders, usually so open, so present, drew in ever so slightly. As if the weight of his father's words had found a home there again. He didn't speak right away. Just folded the letter slowly, deliberately, like it might vanish if he pressed hard enough. "He wants me back," William said at last, voice flat. "Back in the city, back on the board, back in the family business." The words sat heavy in the air between us. I didn't answer, not immediately. Because what do you say to that? When a legacy calls, it doesn't whisper. It demands. I'd always known this was possible, that the life we were building could be interrupted, dismantled, overwritten by the sheer force of wealth and history. And I could see it in William's eyes, how even now, after everything, that name still haunted him. Stone. It wasn't just his surname. It was a title, a brand, a chain that glittered like gold and constricted like steel. It followed him into every room, pressed against every decision, whispered in his ear every time he reached for something that wasn't written in his inheritance. "I'll go," he said eventually. Quiet, controlled. "I need to talk to him, in person, set things straight." I nodded, kept my face neutral, but inside a flicker of something twisted. Not fear, not jealousy, just doubt. Not in him, never in him, but in the world we were trying to build. Because sometimes love, when measured against legacy, feels fragile, like something that could break under the weight of what's expected. The next morning he was gone before dawn. He left a note, short, handwritten, nothing dramatic. Just a promise to come back. I held it for longer than I should have, then tucked it in the recipe drawer next to the vanilla beans and cracked measuring spoons. I kept working. There were tiles to argue about, a mixer motor to replace, and invoices to track down. But the bakery felt colder without him. The walls, half painted and echoing with unfinished dreams, seemed to wait with me. Every evening I'd glance toward the road, pretending not to expect headlights. Every night I fell asleep with the ache of missing him lodged somewhere behind my ribs. Then 3 days later, just after midnight, the front door creaked open. I was sitting at the counter, surrounded by paperwork and cold tea. The air smelled like sugar and paint. When I turned, he stood there, coat damp, with rain eyes, bloodshot but clear. Alive, determined. I told him no, he said. My breath caught. "You what I told him. I'm not coming back." William said, stepping further inside. Not to the boardroom, not to the hotel chains, not to that name. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word landed with the weight of finality. I told him I've already built something better, something real, and I won't walk away from it. From you. Something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from the sudden breathtaking pressure of being seen. Not admired, not desired. Chosen. No man had ever looked at my world, this half-finished bakery with flour in the air and receipts on the floor, and said, "This is enough." But William did. He didn't need blueprints to believe in what we had. He didn't need fortune to measure the worth of what we were making. And that truth wrapped itself around my ribs, not like fear, but like a promise. For the first time in my life, I didn't ask if I was enough, because he chose me without being asked. And that changed everything. He looked exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind etched deep into the soul, worn thin by too many years of trying to live up to a name that didn't feel like his. He sat at the edge of the stool near the counter, not slouched, not defeated, but clearly carrying a weight heavier than the rain-soaked coat still clinging to his shoulders. His hair was damp, his shirt collar wrinkled from travel, and yet his presence filled the room like thunder, quiet, charged, undeniable. I poured him tea, the kind he said once reminded him of childhood, before suits and schedules and expectations. We didn't speak. The silence was familiar now, soft around the edges like a shared blanket between two people who no longer needed to explain the ache. Then he finally broke it. He said I was wasting myself. That love is for people with nothing to lose. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet tremble beneath the words, a residue of hurt only a father's disapproval could leave behind. I felt my fingers tighten around the mug. And what did you say? That I'd rather be nothing with you than everything without you. I didn't know how to respond. Those words didn't just land, they shattered something inside me, something fragile I'd been keeping hidden beneath daily routines and cautious hope. I searched his face, looking for hesitation, for some quiet sign of regret. But it wasn't there. He wasn't wavering. He wasn't afraid. The boy who once tiptoed around his life, afraid to make noise, afraid to claim space, he was gone. And in his place stood a man who had chosen, not out of rebellion, not to make a statement, but because he believed in his marrow that this our flower-covered counters, late nights with aching backs, love built from broken things, was worth more than legacy. "You know this place isn't easy," I said softly, barely above a whisper. "It's small. It breaks sometimes. So do I." He took my hand in his warm and rough from labor he hadn't known a year ago. "I'm not here for easy," he said. "I'm here for real." The quiet returned, but it didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like understanding, like forgiveness, like truth. Later that night, he didn't change out of his slacks or complain about the flour in his shoes. He just rolled up his sleeves and helped me restock the shelves. I watched him reach for jars, wipe dust off tins, fold napkins without being asked. In a room built from secondhand dreams and first chances, he looked entirely at home. Maybe that's what love is. Not grand declarations or perfect timing. Not the fairy tales they sell you in movies. Maybe it's simply someone who shows up when you're too tired to ask. Someone who sees the cracks and chooses to stay anyway. And as we moved in quiet rhythm, shelves filling space, softening, I felt something shift. I stopped bracing for the fall, because for the first time I knew he wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. The morning we opened the doors, my hands wouldn't stay still. I tried to hide it, folding napkins, adjusting menus, wiping the same counter twice, but the tremble lingered beneath everything. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something more delicate, more profound. A hum under the skin. The quiet knowing that this, after all the scraped knees, sleepless nights, and whispered dreams, was real. We had built something from the ground up. Not just walls and windows, but a place where people could breathe, rest, feel whole again. The first guests arrived slowly. A couple with windblown hair looking for coffee. A mother and child holding hands like it was all they had. A traveler with tired eyes asking if the room with blue shutters was ready. And we welcomed them all, with bread still warm from the oven, with rooms scented faintly of lemon and sea salt, with coffee that held more heart than caffeine. There was laughter from the kitchen, from the guests, from somewhere deep in me that hadn't laughed like that in years. I watched William move through it all, not directing, not commanding, just present,